Hey everyone, and welcome to another video from Cult of Paint. You've got Andy here, and I'm going to be taking you through how to paint this white scar bike. Really enjoyed painting this, and I hope you enjoy watching the video. So I've primed the model black, and that's because, particularly in this model, there's a lot of nook and crannies that are hard to get to, and it's actually just easier to have them as shadow. We're going to be using the airbrush to paint this black, so getting up to a bright white is no problem. I'm going to paint the bike off the base so I can spray at the angles I need to. As always, I'll be using my Cult of Paint Infinity airbrush, and I have the 0.4 needle in there. That's because I have less problems when I have this bigger needle size. It's perfect for this kind of miniature. So the base coat is going on, and this is Tamiya Ocean Grey number 2. And I love to use Tamiya paints because they're really smooth, and I have again a lot less problems in the airbrush. I've diluted it about 3 parts thinner to the paint, and of course I have to use the Tamiya thinner with this one. You can use Tamiya thinner for any paint, but for Tamiya paints you have to use Tamiya. So the reason I'm able to get such a smooth white is that I'm basically taking my time with this base coat. So here you can see I'm applying my second stage, and it almost looks like a brighter colour, but it's just that second application. Thinning the paints nicely and taking our time to build it up is what's going to result in a smooth finish. Make sure each coat is super dry before you move on to the next one. So for this base coat, it did take me 3 passes, and then I had a really nice grey, and this ocean grey gives adequate contrast for when we're painting white. So you can see we've built up a nice smooth base layer, and you can also see why I went with the black primer, because we have some nice shadows in those parts that are going to be really hard to get to. Now for the next step, I'm using the Games Workshop Ulthuan Grey. And I really like this grey just because of the kind of blue tinge to it. That's really the only reason. The main thing you're going to notice me doing here is I'm holding the miniature at an angle, so when I spray the highlight it doesn't catch the shadow parts. So there's no need to do any masking, we just need to angle it correctly. So I just always move around the miniature so that I'm spraying in the direction, and it's only going to catch the areas that I want. And I'm just going to move around the model slowly and carefully, building up the colour. This stage took me 2 coats, so it was really worth spending the time on the base coat to get it smooth, and it's made all the steps after easier. So you can see my second application of the paint. I'm just carefully trying to highlight it now and just brighten it up. And this second pass, I really start to get close to white because it is a very bright grey, but not quite there yet. So now we're painting the pure white, which is going to be obviously the brightest highlight we do today. And for this, I'm taking my time and only spraying quite a small highlight. You can see I'm angling the miniature, so I'm just catching those edges and leaving the shadows alone. And if you get that right angle, it really looks like you've masked it, but masking takes a long time, so I prefer to try and do it this way, with no masking at all. So here is what it should look like at this stage. It looks pretty good, but we've got one last step to do, and that's go back to the shadow colour, which is the ocean grey, and I'm going to apply what I call an airbrush glaze. So I've diluted this even further, and this is going to be about 5 parts of thinner to 1 part paint, and I'm basically going back and reinforcing those shadows. What it will do is smooth everything out and also bring back some of the contrast. I've chosen this ocean grey because I think that it's as strong as we want to go with white, otherwise it's going to have too much contrast, but I'm still trying to be sparing with this, as you can see, and doing it really thin allows us to control that, because we have shadows there, but we're just trying to reinforce them, and you can see this is a subtle effect. Again, watch how I'm angling the model, so this time it's not going to hit the highlights, it's just going to catch those shadow parts. And that's it after the glazing, and we have some really nice contrast now. Just going to add some more in some parts I missed, and a second pass. Always start too thin with this and just take it easy. Then you can take your time and adjust it as you go. Now I give the whole miniature a spray of gloss varnish, and this is to prepare it for our transfers and also washing the recesses. We've got videos for how to do transfers, so I suggest you check those out up in the link at the top. So I've just sped up this footage and you can just see me putting the transfers on. It's worth noting I'm using the Horus Heresy White Scar transfers, and that's because I prefer them all red without the yellow. So it looks pretty awesome with the decals on, and now it's glossed up. I want to take advantage of that and do some washes into the recesses. For that I've decided to use one of the contrast paints, the Gryph Charger Grey. And this has got quite a nice blue tone to it, and the gloss varnish will really help it flow into the recesses. When that's done on all the recesses, then I'm going to use some ultra matte varnish. I do some edge highlighting, but not much really, just around the head and a few key areas. And I also use pure white here to correct any mistakes that I made with the pin wash. I tried to be as careful as I could, but it's inevitable we'll make some mistakes, which isn't great on white. So this is what it looks like now with all the recess washes done and the little edge highlights. But now we need to block in all the areas for the rest of the details in black. I'm using model color black, you can use your black of choice, and we'll just switch to when I finish this job. So that's what it looks like with all the black done, and it looks even better already because we don't have the messy white sprayed where we don't want it to be. I have to admit this took a while as I didn't want to make any mistakes. Now for the red, I'm going to base coat with Khorne Red, but I've actually added a little bit of this contrast paint, which makes it more of a crimson kind of colour, as you can see on the palette there. And we're going to take advantage of the fact that the chest eagle is sprayed white, and so we're diluting it so it just runs into the recesses. And the contrast paint will help with this. I'm looking to get even coverage, but it's just going to help with the highlights because I'll be able to see the little individual feather parts easier. I also base coat the eye lens at the same time. I found this needed 2 coats to get a solid colour, but we've got the nice crimson tone I was looking for. Now I want to highlight the feathers with Mephiston Red. To make highlights, I'm just adding a little bit of white into the Mephiston Red, so just add little touches until you feel you've made the right colour. And now I'm just trying to catch the tips of all these wings. This is quite tricky. If you're doing this for the tabletop, you might just want to leave it with the contrast wash that we did in the first step. An optional next step is adding some more white to the Mephiston Red and adding smaller, brighter little highlights. You can take this as far as you want until you have the contrast that you like the look of. You can see I pushed it pretty far, and I just tried to be nice and neat with this part. I really like the look of this. If you make any mistakes, you can go back to your base colour and just make some little corrections. Just get it back into the recesses. The eye lens I highlighted the same with Mephiston Red. Then I made a mix with Lugganath Orange, about 50-50. And the final highlight was the orange on its own, trying to make that nice and tight. Then I finished with the dreaded white dot, which I managed to do first go, although a little gingerly. Now we're going to paint the leather parts, and I base coat the pouches and stuff with Rhinox Hide. Then I do a nice neat highlight adding a few scratches and texture as I go with Scale Gobi Brown. I love this paint because it's super matte, and that's the reason I've used it, as well as the colour. Now I use that same Gobi Brown to base coat the Purity Seal. It's worth noting the Purity Seal wax part, I use the same recipe as the Chest Eagle. Now I just add a little bit of Ushabti Bone and a little bit of white too, which stops it going too yellow. And then I added highlights with this. You can add more white if you want brighter highlights. For the text, I like to mix Rhinox Hide with a touch of black. Just make sure you hold the model so you have a comfortable angle to try and paint that little bit of text on. I found this very hard to do on the camera, I have to admit. Now we're going to start the black highlighting. And for this, I'm using Vallejo Dark Grey. I use the side of the brush for those kind of tight highlights. And then the larger areas like the exhaust pipes, I'm using the tip of the brush to paint large area highlights. The next step is neutral grey, and you can see I can use the side of the brush here on the chainsword. And then the tip of the brush again on the exhausts, and this time I'm covering a smaller area. Finally, I use blue grey pale, and I'm showing you this on the face, so you've just got a little different part to look at. And I'll show you again on the exhausts, and this time I'm just adding quite a small highlight. I'm not looking for blending here, just nicely placed highlights. I want this to look cool but not take too long, so that's why I'm going for this way. Not blending, but nice placement. Now we're going to base all the metal areas such as the exhausts, and for this I'm using Games Workshop Iron Warriors. I love this new colour and I definitely prefer it over Leadbelcher. I have diluted it on the wet palette and I have no problems with it on the wet palette, and I build this up in 2 coats. It's really important to start your metals nice and smooth. Now I mix in some Stormhost Silver, maybe a 50-50 mix, and you can actually see where the natural light is catching, and I'm just trying to paint the highlights only in those areas. I do the same thing but a smaller area, and this is with pure Stormhost Silver. And you can see I can replicate this technique on the bolters, just painting along the cylinder shape. Now I'm going to use an airbrush glaze again. This time it's going to be black, and we're going to use this to shade the bottom of it. I prefer this over Nuln Oil because we get a very even finish, and we can apply the layers gradually until we've got the sheen and the shadow that we like. So I'm applying a second pass here, and you can see it's just getting that little bit darker. And we can really gradually build up this effect, which is quite nice. I'm also going to spray some slightly thicker black just on the end, like it's a kind of burnt exhaust effect. We can do some really elaborate effects on this, but I'm going simple here. Now we're going to apply battle damage, and for this I'm using Vallejo Dark Grey. It's really important we do this battle damage with a bit of logic, and that's why I'm starting with the underside here, which is probably where it's going to have the most damage. I'm also focusing on the edges first, as they're going to wear away quicker, and then I'll do the sort of plain areas last, as they have the least priority. You can see I'm working on the axle part here, and that's definitely going to have a lot of damage. So I start with the edges and just add a few chips and scratches in the plain areas. Try to get a bit of a sense of direction by having scratches that all go the same way. Now I'm going to add a few chips into this big white plain area. This looks really nice, so I don't want to mess it up. So I just take my time to add 1 or 2 chips and then see how it looks. I can also use the side of the brush to catch these edges and get really nice neat scratches. I make sure I do the marine as well, but I'm actually going to put more damage on the bike itself. Again, focusing on the edges of the armour, then some random chips on the edge. So as you can see, the front part here has the most damage, and we have some direction with the scratches. We have a little bit around the feet of the marine, and then we just have some small chips on the elbows and shoulders and stuff. So just take your time with damage and it can look awesome. So the last step for the bike is we're going to use some Gobi Brown, and this is going to go in as a wash with about 5 parts water to 1 part paint, and this is going to go all over the tyres, and this is going to match it to your base. You can see if I put too much on, I can use the brush to take that away, just leaving it in the recess. It's important to note that I'm using Gobi Brown because that's what colour my base is going to be. For the base, I just used some Games Workshop AGRELLAN Earth, and I airbrushed this all over with Gobi Brown because I like the texture, but I didn't like the colour. Now what I want to do is spray a highlight, but I'm going to get a really tight angle here, and that's so I leave on the other sides of the texture some shadow, and this is going to have a more dramatic effect. And it's really easy, you just have to get a really tight angle with the airbrush, and hopefully you can see how we're catching those light areas, but it's leaving a shadow on the other side. And I think that looks pretty cool compared to how easy it is to do. You can do the reverse and add deeper shadows. For this I'm just spraying Rhinox Hide from the other side. I don't think it necessarily needed it, but I really wanted to show you this technique as I think it's so simple and it makes your bases look great. And there you go, from above you can see you've got some nice light and shadow now. I spray the rim with black, and this means I get a really nice flat finish, and again I'm just angling it so I don't spray the sand. Final step for the base is to add some dark sand weathering powder. For this I'm just going to add a few random dots. This stuff goes everywhere so I don't have too much on the brush at a time, and I'm just trying to apply it randomly. Once that's done, I use my thinner to seal it. And it looks like it's disappeared, but when it's dry, it will be in all the recesses and it will look fantastic. And there you have it, one finished White Scar bike. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you can see that the techniques, although quite simple in terms of how many steps they are, we can get fantastic results if we take our time on each of these processes. I really enjoy painting this bike, and I am resisting hard from starting a White Scars army. I also hope you can see that painting white isn't actually too bad a process. We just need to pick the right paints, get adequate contrast, and make sure we're diluting our paints correctly. The airbrush does make white a much easier task. I'm sure we'll get to doing a video where we do white with the brush, but if I was going to do a White Scars army, I would be using the airbrush. As always, if you like this video, please hit like, please subscribe to see future videos from us, and yeah, give us a comment. We always like to hear your thoughts, and hopefully we can see some White Scars from you in the future. See you in the next one.